Because the reality of the situation is thus: if we don't ask questions, if we don't look to the past, if we don't look at systems like transmog, arguably the worst transmog system in all of gaming, and question as to whether or not weapon crafting will follow in those same footsteps, even if there's only a 1% chance that'll happen, we have not but ourselves to blame if it does. What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages? Joker back again, once again. So we have talked a lot about Bungie's scummy monetization practices. From the cash shop, where more effort is made to fill it to the brim with new tchotchkes each and every season than actually put into the seasons. We have talked about the ever-diminishing size of the yearly expansion, all while Bungie threatens players with FOMO to buy the super special awesome collector's edition, or pay more later, purely so that they can lock players into a year of content sight unseen. But I think it's time that we look towards the future of Destiny. Now, I have avoided talking about the substantial Destiny leak that reveals the future of Destiny with any real itemization for the last year. These leaks, for better or worse, have proven to be extremely accurate. And while we don't necessarily need them to talk about the potential monetization of the weapon crafting system, they lend credence to the idea that, at the very least, we should be asking questions. But we all know how asking questions goes over in the Destiny community.
Don't ask questions, just consume product and then get excited for next products.
We're about to talk about potential Witch Queen spoilers, so leave now or forever hold your peace. What you see before you is an itemized list of what is supposed to be coming in Witch Queen. The key point of interest is that weapon crafting is specifically listed as a restricted upsell feature. Raids are not listed like this, story missions are not listed like this, which implies that this feature, like transmog, may have some additional monetization tied to it. So what could this mean? Best case scenario? All this means is you will have to own Witch Queen to use it. Fine, fair enough, have a nice day. That said, this is still technically, intrinsically a pay-to-win feature. If we are to accept Destiny 2 by the terms that Bungie has chosen to market Destiny 2 as, then what is Destiny 2? Destiny 2, according to Bungie's marketing, is a free-to-play MMO. By saying that, Bungie has outlined the rules of engagement and how we discuss this content. And paywalling content in a free-to-play MMO, where players are rewarded with an advantage for opting into that content, is by definition pay to win. This is, of course, to anybody who understands nuance, different than, say, if you were buying one expansion to the next. Because in that instance, that's the only way to continue playing the game. There's no illusions about it being free to play, there's no tricky marketing, there's no bait and switch, it's all above board. The weapon crafting system being paywalled behind Witch Queen in a free to play game is, of course, the fun best case scenario. This is not likely something many will get hung up on, but it does call into question Bungie calling Destiny a free-to-play game. And that should be called out as the ludicrous statement it truly is. Because if Bungie, or by extension Destiny fans, want to use free-to-play as an argument for the more egregious excesses of Bungie monetization, then they must take the unflattering criticisms that come with being a free-to-play game as well. Like when they lock a highly advantageous feature like weapon crafting behind a paywall, which does make that feature, in a free-to-play game, pay to win. And before fanboys shriek at me, "But Joker, that's not fair! That's in bad faith!" Is it though? After all, I'm engaging Bungie with the terminology that they have chosen to use. If it opens them up to unflattering comparisons, that's not my fault. If Bungie wants to pretend that Destiny is anything more than Halo with extra steps or Borderlands with less loot, all while screeching about how it's really an MMORPG, on top of saying that it's free to play instead of free to try, then I'm going to hold them to their standards. If they wish to change those standards, then my criticisms will change. The next thing that I've seen people say is, of course there will be microtransactions connected to weapon crafting, and they will all be cosmetic. Which is fine, fair enough. However, that's always been the remit of the cash shop. There's also the fact that Bungie said they would never do legendary weapon cosmetics again. This goes hand in hand with people suggesting that weapons will have transmog, but that goes against Bungie's stated goal of weapons not being a stat stick. Now, of course, Bungie as a company is free to change their mind, but as of now, that goes against their modus operandi of saying our weapons aren't stat sticks, and they will no longer have legendary weapon ornaments. Part of that whole Bungie really needs to clarify things that this video is about. On top of that, weapons in Destiny are tied to specific sounds and animation. That's why they're simply not stat sticks. This is also why, if you'll remember, some cosmetics actually gave weapons an advantage. It's not just a skin that changes the way the weapon looks. It's an entirely new model for the weapon that mostly functions as the old one did, however, we know that there's been outliers. All that means is essentially it would be far easier for Bungie to decouple stats and perks from weapons and let players pick and choose what stats and weapons they have on specific models than it would be for Bungie to implement a true transmog system for weapons. And look, I'm not saying that it can't be done, I'm just saying it would be far easier for Bungie to decouple stats and perks from weapons than it would be to implement a full-fledged transmog system for weapons like, say, Final Fantasy XIV. However, those aren't the only possibilities. They're not even the most logical possibilities, they're just what people on Twitter keep saying is going to happen. Let me propose a question. What does weapon crafting mean for Destiny? What actually is Destiny? Well, to hear Bungie say it, it's a free-to-play MMO RPG with loot. And that loot aspect is a large part of Destiny's identity.
There will be a ton of loot! Yeah, right? That's what I thought.
It's really what keeps people playing. Now, of course, we could go on and on and on about the psychology of gambling, and why I believe it's that self-same FOMO gambling psychology that holds much of the Destiny community hostage. But I think we all know that. It's Destiny's dirty little secret. We don't grind the Vault of Glass hundreds of times because it's fun. We do it for the Vex. And we want the Vex because it has intrinsic value because it's largely overpowered in certain arenas of play. I'm sure we've all seen those montages of people losing their absolute shit when they get an exotic or a legendary that they've been looking for. Randomly generated loot or a random chance at loot is the same mentality as loot boxes, only loot boxes are bad because you pay for them. However, that same addictive mentality of, well, maybe this time, maybe this time, maybe this time, maybe this time, is arguably the fundamental driving force behind Destiny's loot system. So giving players an avenue by which they can circumvent the entire system by crafting their own weapons breaks that loot farming addiction. When that cycle is broken, people have nothing to do. They have no reason, for example, to grind Vault of Glass for the 100th time to get a God-rolled Fatebringer. They can just make it. And we've been here before in both Destiny 1 and Destiny 2. In Destiny 1, we had the re-rolling of weapons. In Destiny 2, we had static rolls, which in both instances led to stagnation. Everybody played with the same handful of weapons with the same meta rolls, and there was no reason to really go back and grind any content because, well, you already had the best iteration of the weapon that you could get from that content. And hey, don't get me wrong, fun will always be a factor. But playing a Nightfall 5 times? That's fun. Playing a Nightfall 50 times? Not so much. At least, not for most people. However, playing it 50 times to get the proverbial carrot on the stick is what keeps players engaged. The reality of a weapon crafting system is that it speeds up the depth and the disposability of any content that Bungie adds to the game. And we know, for example, that the Witch Queen raid loot will be part of the weapon crafting system. So the biggest hurdle for Bungie is figuring out how to keep players engaged with the game and the new content. Now, there's a few ways that they can do that. One, make the requirements for crafting any weapon so absurdly egregious that grinding out the weapon looks better by comparison. The other way that Bungie could stop weapon crafting from prematurely killing their loot-based game is by time gating or limiting the number of weapons players can craft during any given season. See something like Warframe or, maybe look no further than Destiny's current transmog system. And at the risk of sounding like a broken record, the only real reason that you would limit the number of transmogs a player can do per season is in the hope that that limitation drives them into the cash shop. Mind you, the transmog system is already a ripoff. It consists entirely of items that players already paid for and had to unlock, that Bungie took away. Meaning, Bungie has already created a system and acclimatized players to it where players are paying for things that they already own, but don't have access to anymore because Bungie either sunset or invalidated those pieces of gear, with one change or another. Bungie created a problem, then sold people the solution with resounding applause. People gave Bungie an inch, why wouldn't they take a mile? So is it really that far afield, given transmog, given that you can progress the season pass in order to save time by paying for it, given that Bungie has already gotten the community used to being nickeled and dimed, whether it's reselling content that they already own or stripping out hundreds of dollars of value from the game as a necessary evil, or selling dungeons separately if you don't FOMO buy the super special awesome collector's edition that locks you into a year of content sight unseen, that Bungie would then take the next logical step and monetize weapon crafting. Would it really surprise anyone at this point if Bungie, just like with Transmog, limited the amount of free currencies that players can get and offered a premium currency when players run out? It would actually be the most logical thing that Bungie has ever done, because we know from Destiny 1 that weapon crafting needs to be somewhat limited. And we also know from Destiny 2 Year 1 what everybody having access to the same exact weapons leads to. None of it is good. So Bungie innately by default should want to limit how many weapons a player can craft, because if they don't, they're inviting players to leave their game, and that's not good. Well, I mean, not good if you want your cash shop to thrive anyways. You want players in the game, not getting what they want and disengaging until something new happens. And given just how much FOMO is tied to Destiny, it would be shocking for Bungie to work against their own self-interest. And again, at the risk of repeating myself, Bungie probably isn't too keen on all of their content being invalidated the first couple of days it's out, quick, fast, and in a hurry while people get god-rolled weapons, all while homogenizing the meta. No, I can't imagine they'd want that at all, but that's what unregulated weapon crafting will bring about. So it makes perfect sense to want to put a limit on it. And once they have put that limit on it, why wouldn't they sell away to make more? I mean, the justification is the exact same thing as the transmog justification. In fact, fanboys, there's your argument, just recycle your transmog argument. People don't need to craft every weapon into a god roll. Just, one or two for PvP, PvE. That's enough. More so when you consider exotics. And there's always next season. And again, I think transmog is the roadmap, because there's really no justifiable reason to actually limit how much transmog a player can do. Anybody who says the limitation placed on players to bar them from content that not only do they already own, but have unlocked, but was made irrelevant by Bungie, is anything more than a scheme to get people into the cash shop, is an idiot. Now, before we end this, one of the things that fanboys often misunderstand about videos like this isn't outrage. Personally, I only ever use a handful of weapons anyways. The butt joker argument of, well, you don't need to craft a million weapons, it certainly applies to me. Because one 140 hand cannon, unless it's an exotic, functions much like the next 140 hand cannon. Same with shotguns, fusion rifle, whatever, name your weapon. However, it's important to have these conversations. It's important to voice these ideas. It's important to get ahead of the curve and let Bungie know that even if they're not considering the monetization of the crafting system in any form, past what many will argue is a fair paywall in an allegedly free-to-play game, there are certain things that are unacceptable. Because the reality of the situation is thus: if we don't ask questions, if we don't look to the past, if we don't look at systems like transmog, arguably the worst transmog system in all of gaming, and question as to whether or not weapon crafting will follow in those same footsteps, even if there's only a 1% chance that'll happen, we have not but ourselves to blame if it does. And I would most certainly argue those who don't voice their concerns early, or worse, shout down those who do, because they just assume that these are assumptions and wild speculation and that there's nothing to it, that we shouldn't be asking the questions, have no right to complain when and if things go sideways. The reality is, when it comes to things like this, what fanboys will never, can never, or outright refuse to understand is ultimately, I want to be wrong. I really truly hope I am. I want to look back at this video and go, wow, I'm glad none of that actually happened. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Remember to like, but only if you did. Subscribe for more. Feel free to donate to my Patreon if you're feeling particularly generous. But above all else, stay frosty.